Star-Lord.
Who?
Well, Star-Lord, man. Legendary outlaw.
You know what old Jack Burton always says at a time like this?
Who?
Jack Burton. Me.
As event films like Star Wars and Raiders of the Lost Ark were conquering the industry, first-time screenwriters Gary Goldman and David Z. Weinstein were concocting their own perspective genre-bending blockbuster, a mashup of classic American westerns and Hong Kong action movies. Set in San Francisco's Chinatown in the late 1800s, the original script for Big Trouble in Little China followed lone buffalo hunter Wiley Prescott, who rolls into town and gets stranded after his horse is stolen, which leaves him no choice but to join forces with the Chinese locals and do battle with the evil sorcerer Lo Pan. The script was optioned by 20th Century Fox, whose president Lawrence Gordon offered the job to Walter Hill, the director of 48 Hours, The Warriors, and Streets of Fire. But Hill turned it down due to his disinterest in the Western setting. The studio then demanded a total rewrite so the film would take place in modern day, but screenwriters Goldman and Weinstein refused to make such drastic changes, so they were replaced by veteran screenwriter, director, and noted Hollywood script doctor W.D. Richter, who had just directed The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai Across the Eighth Dimension, the 1984 cult sci-fi adventure starring Peter Weller, Ellen Barkin, and John Lithgow. Richter gave the script for Big Trouble in Little China a complete overhaul, while keeping the Chinatown setting and following a lot of the same story beats. But he added quite a few modern twists and a lot more of the bizarre quirkiness you'd expect from the director of Buckaroo Banzai. Cattle driver Wiley Prescott and his stolen horse became Jack Burton and his stolen cab. The film had its script. Now it just needed its director and star. Fresh off his successful 1978 independent slasher film Halloween, director John Carpenter wanted to branch off from the horror genre for his next project, which ended up being the 1979 made-for-TV docudrama Elvis, debuting less than 2 years after the shocking death of Elvis Presley. It starred 28-year-old Kurt Russell, who had spent his youth doing guest spots on popular TV shows like The Man from U.N.C.L.E., Gunsmoke, and Gilligan's Island, and starring in various Disney films including The Computer Wore Tennis Shoes and The Strongest Man in the World. Incidentally, Russell's very first film role was in the 1963 Elvis Presley movie It Happened at the World's Fair.
Adams, they're all nuts.
It's like they knew. Years later, Russell's Emmy-winning performance as the King marked the first of several iconic collaborations between him and director John Carpenter. In 1981, they reunited for the sci-fi thriller Escape from New York, where Russell did his best Clint Eastwood impression as the film's gruff anti-hero, Snake Plissken.
I don't give a fuck about your war or your president.
He went on to star in Carpenter's terrifying remake of The Thing in 1982, a huge box office flop that didn't become a respected horror landmark until years later. Following the failure of The Thing, a disheartened John Carpenter rebuilt his reputation within the studio system by directing an adaptation of Stephen King's Christine and the sci-fi drama Starman, both of which did good business. So Carpenter landed Big Trouble in Little China, and since he had always adored westerns and kung fu films, he instantly jumped at the chance to blend the two.
W.D. Richter, a school buddy of mine, rewrote it for modern day. And I thought it was the greatest, absolute nutball script I'd ever read. I have to do this. So off we went.
Carpenter loved the idea of mashing up westerns with martial arts, magic, monsters, and laughs. And for the lead role of blowhard, long-haul trucker Jack Burton, Carpenter knew good old Kurt Russell would be the perfect fit.
I just sparked to it immediately. Loved that John wanted me to play Jack Burton. And this was going to be, very different in that we both shared this sense of humor that we didn't ever stop to think, would anybody else?
Sporting knee-high moccasins, a colorful Fu Manchu tank top, and one glorious mullet, Kurt Russell as Jack Burton in Big Trouble in Little China is the quintessential 80s cowboy. Sorry, John Travolta. Jack Burton likes to think he's the lone gunslinger of old Hollywood westerns, and as much as Kurt Russell emulated a gritty Clint Eastwood for his performance as Snake Plissken, he channels John Wayne to give Jack Burton a heightened macho swagger that the film makes fun of instead of glorifies.
Like I told my last wife, I says, honey, I never drive faster than I can see. Besides that, it's all in the reflexes.
In an age where Indiana Jones, James Bond, or John Rambo were the typical big screen heroes, Jack Burton was a loudmouth braggart whose ego greatly outweighed his competence, which didn't quite sit well with the nervous studio execs after watching the film for the first time.
What the studio wanted was Indiana Jones. And that wasn't what I gave them. I never took seriously the idea that we had to copy Rambo or Indiana Jones to be successful. Because he was playing this blowhard, the sort of John Wayne without a clue.
But clearly he, in his own mind, was sort of a John Wayne character, a take control, take care of business guy. And I did think, what if I play this guy like? It was sort of, kind of had that it was John Wayne starring in the movie, but what he didn't know was that the director was always not printing the take that he thought they were printing. He was always printing the take where he kind of like stumbled here, or couldn't open the window there, or started to get up on the horse and didn't quite work. Cut. But that's what he put in the movie. So that was that side of John Wayne, what John Wayne never knew the director was doing behind his back.
Kurt Russell effortlessly brings his natural charisma to the braggadocious Jack Burton, but it's all done with a clear sense of self-awareness. Both Russell and the movie know that Jack is not the real hero, even though the character thinks he is. He carries himself as one of those classic grizzled movie cowboys, but whenever he tries to step up and take charge, he inevitably fumbles the ball. It's what makes him such a great character, but it was a joke that didn't quite connect at the time. Moviegoers saw Kurt Russell as the cocksure all-American white guy taking up the most space on the poster, but the movie itself gives us this bumbling oaf who's in way over his head, all while the supporting cast of predominantly Asian characters were actually doing most of the heavy lifting. To be clear, many of the supporting actors in Big Trouble in Little China were actually born in the United States and are only of East Asian descent. Just thought I'd throw that in there before you made your way down to the comments section. After seeing him in 1985's Year of the Dragon, director John Carpenter picked Dennis Dunn to play restaurant owner Wang Chi, the film's real hero. The amusing dynamic between Wang and Jack Burton is comparable to the 2011 Green Hornet movie I reviewed several years ago, and will still defend, damn it. It put a heavy comedic spin on the iconic relationship between the Green Hornet and his sidekick Kato, where Seth Rogen's Green Hornet was a spoiled and self-centered goofball, while Jay Chu's Kato had the serious demeanor and all of the fighting skills, making you question who the sidekick really was, which also applies to Jack Burton and Wang Chi. Kim Cattrall plays plucky Chinatown civil rights lawyer Gracie Law, because she's a lawyer, you see. The film sets her up to be Jack's inevitable love interest, but like the many tropes this movie plays with, Gracie is more memorable than your run-of-the-mill damsel in distress. Victor Wong is also great as Egg Shen, a powerful magician moonlighting as a local tour guide, who sort of fills the wise old mentor role by explaining the source of Chinatown's strange mystical occurrences, that being the evil immortal sorcerer David Lo Pan, played with a distinct gleeful wickedness by veteran character actor James Hong. John Carpenter set out to make the ultimate kung fu ghost story by taking the supernatural elements his films were already famous for and blending them with all the raw energy and crazy visuals he enjoyed from Hong Kong martial arts movies. One specific influence was the 1983 fantasy film Zu: Warriors from the Magic Mountain, which at the time was deemed as China's answer to Star Wars, and Big Trouble in Little China was Carpenter's love letter to all that stuff. But it didn't come without controversy. Even while cameras were still rolling on Big Trouble in Little China, it was already facing scrutiny for tapping into insensitive Chinese stereotypes, which I can sympathize with, but I won't dwell on this too long because A, who am I to analyze or oversimplify the effects a film like this can have on the Asian community, and B, I'd much rather focus on the positives this movie has had on our culture as a whole. Now, I'm not defending this movie out of nostalgia. In fact, I wish I'd discovered it as a kid, but it just wasn't on my radar until later. It was a childhood favorite for a lot of people though, and it likely got American kids interested in looking further into authentic Chinese culture and cinema. You know, like the kind this guy keeps blabbering on about. Big Trouble in Little China evokes ancient Chinese mythology depicted in movies that were actually coming out of China back then. But unfortunately, there is the harmful side effect of the Chinese community being broadly painted as exotic mystics or even dangerous outsiders. And with director John Carpenter being the American white guy in charge, that makes him an easy target of this kind of criticism. In his defense, though, the film boasts a great cast of Asian and Asian American actors who aren't all just playing the same kind of character, which, even to this day, is still an issue in American movies. And for his time, I think Carpenter embraced diversity better than many of his filmmaking peers. It doesn't get enough credit that actors Dennis Dun and Victor Wong also went on to be in Carpenter's next film, Prince of Darkness, as prominent characters whose ethnicities were completely inconsequential to the actual story. And because Carpenter later went on to make a more politically driven film with They Live, I think Big Trouble in Little China gets misconstrued as a movie that also has some kind of agenda, when it's really just a fun 80s romp. Again, I fully understand the criticisms, but rather than chastise some dated ideas in a movie that's over 30 years old, I'd much rather appreciate its creativity, ambition, and the influence it's had on the pop culture landscape over the years. Big Trouble in Little China was on the cutting edge of American-made martial arts films, so despite its ingenuity, the fight scenes are admittedly a little primitive, but still fun nonetheless. Director John Carpenter tends to make films where big things happen in very small places. Be it a police station under siege in Assault on Precinct 13, a dark suburban street in Halloween, an Arctic research bunker in The Thing, a haunted church in Prince of Darkness, or a subterranean labyrinth in Big Trouble in Little China. Production designer John Lloyd, who had worked with Carpenter on The Thing, used clever perspective tricks to create sprawling sets within a very limited amount of space and make this world seem bigger than it really was. Probably the most surprising aspect of the film is that it's also kind of a creature feature, but unlike the disturbing imagery from The Thing, these memorable monster designs are a bit more on the cartoony side, almost like something right out of Ghostbusters, which makes sense considering the effects for both this and Ghostbusters were supervised by ILM veteran Richard Edlund, and making it all look good from behind the camera was Carpenter's frequent cinematographer Dean Cundey, who just doesn't get enough credit for his contributions to the iconic look and feel of big 80s blockbusters. After working on a string of obscure B-movies, Cundey's first big break came in 1978 when he did the striking photography for Carpenter's Halloween, turning what could have been cheap, forgettable exploitation into the stylish and atmospheric masterpiece it is. Cundey worked with Carpenter on 4 more of his films, along with the first 2 Halloween sequels, and then went on to become a go-to cinematographer for other groundbreaking filmmakers like Robert Zemeckis and Steven Spielberg. After production wrapped on Big Trouble in Little China, it was screened for the 20th Century Fox executives, who were expecting this to be their own Indiana Jones, but by the end, they were baffled by what they saw. In particular, Fox chairman Barry Diller didn't understand that the character of Jack Burton was supposed to be a complete buffoon.
Are you crazy? Is that your problem?
So in order to play up Jack's brave heroism, which he didn't really have in the first place, Diller forced Carpenter to shoot a brief prologue that featured Victor Wong's character recounting his time with the legendary Jack Burton, a great and noble warrior.
If you're protecting Jack
You
Burton...
leave Jack Burton alone. We are in his debt. He showed great courage.
Bullshit. He was an idiot. But I shot it.
Despite some rather positive test screenings, the Fox bigwigs ultimately decided to bury the film and killed its chances at the box office with a rather flimsy marketing campaign.
Son of a bitch must pay.
Although we did get a pretty classic Drew Struzan poster out of it.
Adventure doesn't come any bigger. Rated PG-13. Starts Wednesday, July 2nd at a theater near you.
When Big Trouble in Little China was released in the summer of 1986, it completely flatlined at the box office and got swallowed up by some of the year's biggest hits like Top Gun, Aliens, Crocodile Dundee, and The Karate Kid Part 2.
It was an odd experience, an unpleasant experience, because the head of the studio was a legendary character. And the first thing they had me try to do is cut out everything funny. And then after we previewed it, they wanted to put it all back in. And it was not a fun experience. That's what drove me out of making movies for a studio for a long time.
The failure of Big Trouble in Little China was such a blow to John Carpenter, he gave the finger to big studio productions and decided to go back to his low-budget independent roots. As you might expect, Big Trouble in Little China eventually found its legs on home video, and in more recent years, what was once considered a huge box office flop was now getting officially licensed merchandise, like toys, games, coffee table books, and even a line of comic books, including a popular 2016 crossover miniseries that brought two iconic Kurt Russell characters together for the first time, Jack Burton and Snake Plissken. Whatever. Let me know when Lieutenant Cash meets Captain Ron, then we'll talk. It took some time for Big Trouble in Little China to find its audience, but its lasting impact on pop culture is undeniable. Much like the film, the 1992 mega-hit fighting game Mortal Kombat took elements of Eastern and Western mythology and crammed them together into one of the bloodiest and most successful video game franchises of all time. One of its most popular characters, Raiden, God of Thunder and Protector of Earthrealm, gets his signature look from the Three Storms, David Lo Pan's three elemental warrior henchmen, while Lo Pan himself was a clear predecessor of evil sorcerer Shang Tsung, the big bad of the original Mortal Kombat, who, much like Lo Pan, first appeared as an elderly man, but later had his youth restored in Mortal Kombat 2. Shang Tsung. Man, there really should have been a Mortal Kombat movie directed by old Johnny C. Carpenter, not Cage. Johnny Cage wins. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles co-creator Kevin Eastman has cited Jack Burton's bull-headed and impulsive personality as an influence on cocky vigilante Casey Jones. And a 2014 episode of Nickelodeon's excellent computer-animated Ninja Turtle series was a full-on tribute to Big Trouble in Little China, which included numerous references to the film and even brought in actor James Hong to lend his voice to a very obvious carbon copy of David Lo Pan.
Hold on, Casey! No magic necessary. It's all in the reflexes.
The legacy of Big Trouble in Little China can even be felt in modern superhero blockbusters like Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy, where Chris Pratt gives his scoundrel character, Peter Quill, an egotistical swagger that feels just as inspired by Jack Burton as it was by Han Solo or Indiana Jones.
You know what old Jack Burton always says at a time like this? Who? Jack Burton. Me.
Hey, you know what? There's another name you might know me by. Star-Lord.
Who?
Star-Lord, man. Legendary outlaw.
And if that wasn't enough of a nod, Kurt Russell himself played Quill's father, Ego the Living Planet, in the 2017 sequel. And while we're in the Marvel Universe, Thor Ragnarok director Taika Waititi originally pitched his vision for the film's tone as being heavily influenced by Big Trouble in Little China, resulting in a hilarious and epic superhero fantasy adventure with outlandish characters, plenty of psychedelic visuals, and a rich 80s-inspired color palette. Even Chris Hemsworth as Thor was getting tossed around here more than usual, and after having portrayed the Asgardian thunder god for many years, Thor Ragnarok firmly established him as a charming, lovable, and occasionally dim-witted brute, just like Jack Burton.
Surprise! Ow. Sad to be sure.
There are two significant Blu-ray releases of Big Trouble in Little China worth exploring. The Region A version released in the US in 2009, and Arrow Video's Region B version, which came out in the UK in 2013. The Region A Blu-ray includes a commentary track originally recorded for the 2001 DVD release that features an entertaining, laid-back conversation between John Carpenter and Kurt Russell, and a second bonus audio track that isolates Carpenter's fantastic synth-heavy musical score. Next is a collection of deleted scenes, alternate takes, and an extended ending, along with a brief promotional featurette that includes on-set footage and cast and crew interviews. After that, we have a gloriously cheesy music video for the film's main theme performed by the Coupe de Villes, an experimental rock band that was comprised of John Carpenter and his two longtime friends, Nick Castle, the original Michael Myers, and director of The Last Starfighter and Major Payne, and Tommy Lee Wallace, who was Carpenter's production designer and co-editor on Halloween and The Fog, and has directed horror favorites like Halloween 3, Fright Night Part 2, and the original It miniseries. Next is an interview with visual effects producer Richard Edlin that, at any time, allows you to switch angles with your remote to a full-screen gallery of behind-the-scenes photos. Additionally, we're given a collection of promotional material including 2 theatrical trailers, a Spanish-language trailer, TV spots, and a huge gallery of rare set photos and production stills. Not too shabby if you ask me, but if you're lucky enough to own a Region B, or better yet, a region-free player, then you're better off treating yourself to Arrow Video's 2013 Blu-ray release, which contains all the bonus content previously mentioned, along with 5 additional interviews produced exclusively for this release. Return to Little China features a sit-down with director and composer John Carpenter, who, as always, speaks candidly about his positive and negative experiences working on the film. In Being Jack Burton, actor Kurt Russell talks about how he approached playing the lead role while also recounting his other works with John Carpenter. In Carpenter and I, cinematographer Dean Cundy also goes back through his experiences on the Carpenter films he's shot while touching on some of his other iconic work. Producing Big Trouble sits down with producer Larry Franco, who was Kurt Russell's brother-in-law at the time John Carpenter directed the Elvis TV movie, which was where Franco first met Carpenter and they became friends. Franco went on to serve as a producer or an assistant director on every Carpenter film made during the 80s, ending their run together with They Live in 1988. Finally, staging Big Trouble features stunt coordinator and actor Jeff Amata, who has done a wide variety of stunt work on nearly 200 films during his career, including other Carpenter movies like They Live, Prince of Darkness, and Memoirs of an Invisible Man. To top it all off, Arrow Video has included a reversible sleeve where you have the choice to display their exclusive artwork by Mondo artist Jay Shaw or Drew Struzan's classic poster art. Yeah, I'm going with this one. But as it turns out, this review jumped the gun a bit, as Scream Factory has recently announced it will be releasing its own collector's edition Blu-ray later this year. Triple dip. Big Trouble in Little China was a huge departure from the kinds of movies John Carpenter was most famous for at the time, but in many ways, it still feels like one of his. It may have had a long journey from shunned studio failure to beloved cult favorite, but at least it's now getting the attention it should have gotten from the start. Carpenter has since admitted that the movie was a big learning experience for him about the Asian community, but regardless of some of the film's antiquated ideas, it is first and foremost an Indiana Jones-style throwback to classic pulp filmmaking. Big Trouble in Little China is just pure fun, a one-of-a-kind fantasy comedy adventure with great performances, clever special effects, and endless quotable lines. It's not my favorite John Carpenter film, but it's certainly near the top of the list for sheer entertainment value alone. So I'll give it and Arrow Video's excellent Blu-ray a 5 out of 5 recommendation.
No horseshit, Jack. No horseshit.
Ever since the earliest days of the DVD shelf, John Carpenter has been a name that just keeps popping up, which comes down to my admiration for him as a hands-on filmmaker with the ability to wear different hats behind the scenes and make the most out of his limited budgets. No matter what genre he tackled, he made films that were distinctly his, even going so far as to proudly stamp his name above most of his titles. But at the end of the day, he never came across as pretentious about it, and when it comes to actor Kurt Russell, John Carpenter has had a big hand in helping him make a successful career out of being cool.
Okay, you people sit tight, hold the fort, and keep the home fires burning. And if we're not back by dawn, call the president.